Hidden in plain sight along rivers and creeks grows a wild tree that can numb your pain. A pharmaceutical company extracted its compound, tweaked the chemistry just enough to file a patent, and built a billion-dollar empire off it. The original remedy was free. It grew everywhere, and the people who once relied on it were slowly taught to forget. Yet today, nobody touches the bark, and billions are spent on the pill version instead. By the end of this video, you'll learn how to forage it yourself and why its story was buried. Every continent except Antarctica has cultures that used one specific tree bark for pain, not a handful of different barks from different trees. One bark: headaches, fevers, swollen joints, toothaches, muscle soreness after long labor. The same remedy, discovered independently by civilizations that never traded with each other, never shared a language, never occupied the same century. Egyptian physicians used it in the courts of pharaohs. Greek doctors prescribed it to women in childbirth. Native American healers brewed it into tea for warriors returning from battle. Chinese scholars cataloged it in texts that predate the Roman Empire. And then, sometime around the turn of the 20th century, the entire Western world simply stopped talking about it. Not because it stopped working, because someone figured out how to sell a version of it in a bottle. To understand how something this powerful became invisible, you have to go back, not decades, millennia. In a museum in Leipzig, Germany, there is a scroll of papyrus roughly 3,500 years old. Scholars call it the Ebers Papyrus. It is one of the oldest medical documents ever found. Among its hundreds of remedies for ailments ranging from crocodile bites to infections of the eye, there is a prescription for pain and fever that calls for the bark of a tree that grows along the banks of the Nile. Egyptian physicians ground this bark into a paste and pressed it against inflamed joints. They steeped it in water and gave it to patients burning with fever. This was not a village folk remedy passed between neighbors. This was state medicine, practiced in royal courts, recorded on papyrus intended to last forever. And it nearly did. Even older than the Ebers Papyrus are Sumerian clay tablets from roughly 2000 BC. Pressed into wet clay with a reed stylus in the cities of ancient Mesopotamia, these tablets reference the same tree bark for the same purpose: bodily aches, inflammation, fever. 4,000 years ago, in the river valleys between the Tigris and Euphrates, healers already understood what this bark could do. Move forward 1,500 years to the island of Kos in ancient Greece. A physician named Hippocrates, the man Western medicine named its founding oath after, prescribed tea made from this same bark. He documented its ability to lower fevers and ease the pain of childbirth. His writings survived the collapse of empires. 5 centuries later, a Roman military physician named Dioscorides cataloged the bark in his encyclopedia called De Materia Medica. Roman legions carried dried bark in their field medical kits as they marched across Europe, North Africa, and the Middle East. The foundation of Western medicine was built partly on this remedy. On the other side of the world, Chinese physicians documented the same bark in texts dating to approximately 500 BC. The Shenong Ben Cao Jing, one of the oldest surviving pharmacopoeias in human history, references it for fevers and inflammatory conditions. Across the Pacific, Native American nations discovered the same medicine independently. The Cherokee used it, the Ojibwe used it, the Iroquois used it. Each nation had its own preparation methods and its own name for the tree, but the application was identical: pain, fever, swelling. When European settlers arrived on the continent, indigenous healers tried to share what they knew. Some settlers paid attention, most did not. Here is where the tree gets its name: white willow, Salix alba, and its close relatives in the Salix genus, growing along waterways on nearly every continent, used by every major civilization across 4,000 years of recorded history for the exact same purpose. When every culture on Earth independently discovers that a bark works, the bark works. That is not folklore. That is the largest clinical trial in human history, conducted across millennia by billions of people who never met each other. So, if every civilization knew, if the knowledge was documented in papyrus, clay, parchment, and oral tradition across dozens of languages, what happened? The answer begins in a laboratory in Germany in the 1800s, and it involves a decision that would reshape medicine, commerce, and memory itself. In 1828, a German pharmacist named Johann Buchner sat in his laboratory in Munich and extracted a bitter yellow compound from willow bark. He called it salicin, from salix, the Latin word for willow. 10 years later, an Italian chemist named Raffaele Piria figured out how to convert salicin into a more potent form called salicylic acid. The results were remarkable. The compound crushed pain. It dropped fevers within hours, but it also shredded the stomach lining. Patients who took it regularly developed nausea, bleeding, and ulcers. The chemistry was right. The delivery was brutal. For 60 years, researchers across Europe tried to solve this problem. They knew the willow held the answer. They just could not figure out how to deliver it without the damage. Then, in 1897, a chemist named Felix Hoffmann changed everything. Hoffmann worked for a German company called Bayer. At the time, Bayer was primarily a dye manufacturer. Hoffmann took salicylic acid and added a single acetyl group to its molecular structure. The result was acetyl salicylic acid. It kept the pain relief. It reduced the stomach destruction. In 1899, Bayer filed a trademark on the name aspirin and began selling it worldwide. Within 10 years, it was the most purchased medication on the planet. The chemistry came from willow bark. The profits went to Bayer. Now consider what happened next, not as conspiracy, as economics. A willow tree grows for free along any riverbank or creek. The bark peels off in strips with a pocket knife. Tea brews in a kitchen in 10 minutes. No factory required. No tablet press. No bottling line. No cold chain shipping. No pharmacy markup. No prescription pad. Aspirin required industrial chemical synthesis. It required tablet pressing machines and sterile production facilities. It required branded packaging and distribution networks spanning continents. It required sales representatives visiting doctors in their offices. It required advertising budgets in newspapers and eventually on television, and then on the internet. Every step in that chain added cost. Every cost added revenue. Every revenue stream created someone with a financial interest in people not remembering that the tree still grows for free. Nobody published a memo saying, "Stop telling patients about willow bark." The mechanism was quieter than that. A remedy that costs nothing to produce generates no advertising budget. A medicine that grows in the backyard generates no pharmaceutical sales force. A product that anyone can harvest from a riverbank generates no quarterly earnings report. The system that promotes purchasable solutions simply stopped mentioning the free one. Within 2 generations, the connection between the pill and the tree vanished from public memory. Look at the numbers. More than 100 billion aspirin tablets are consumed every single year around the world. The global market for over-the-counter pain relievers, including aspirin, ibuprofen, naproxen, and acetaminophen, exceeds $40 billion annually. Aspirin alone generates billions in yearly sales across dozens of brands and generic manufacturers. Meanwhile, white willow trees line the banks of rivers, streams, and drainage ditches across North America, Europe, and Asia. They grow without anyone planting them. They regenerate bark after harvest. They have been producing the same compound in their cambium layer for millions of years, and they cost nothing. But here is what the pharmaceutical industry did not expect. Researchers eventually went back and tested the original bark against the synthetic pill, and what they found should have made headlines. Clinical trials conducted in the early 2000s tested standardized willow bark extract on patients suffering from chronic lower back pain. One key double-blind randomized trial administered 240 milligrams of salicin daily. While the extract showed statistically significant pain reduction compared to placebo, achieving 240 milligrams of active salicin from raw, unstandardized, home-brewed willow bark tea requires consuming massive, highly variable quantities of bark that can cause severe gastrointestinal distress from concentrated tannins. Standardized extracts deliver precise doses, whereas wild bark tea varies widely in salicin concentration depending on the species, age, and harvest season. But the real surprise was the side effects, or rather, the lack of them. Aspirin works by blocking enzymes called COX-1 and COX-2. Blocking COX-2 reduces pain and inflammation, but blocking COX-1 damages the protective lining of the stomach. That is why long-term aspirin use causes ulcers, gastrointestinal bleeding, and stomach pain in millions of people every year. It is the trade the pill forces you to make. Relief now, damage later. Willow bark does something different. The salicin in the bark does not convert to its active form until it reaches the gut and liver. The conversion happens gradually. There is no sudden concentrated spike hitting the stomach lining all at once. Studies consistently report fewer gastrointestinal side effects with willow bark extract compared to equivalent doses of aspirin. The bark is gentler because it was never designed in a lab. It was designed by 400 million years of evolution. And there is one more detail that almost nobody discusses. Aspirin is one molecule. Acetyl salicylic acid, a single isolated compound extracted from a complex living system. Willow bark contains salicin, yes, but it also contains flavonoids, polyphenols, and tannins. These compounds work together. They modulate each other. They create what researchers now call a synergistic effect, where the combination produces results that no single compound achieves alone. Bayer extracted one molecule from the bark and threw away everything else. It turns out everything else mattered. Now search any major medical research database. Type aspirin. You will find tens of thousands of published studies stretching back over a century. Now type willow bark extract. You will find a few hundred. The ratio tells the same story you have heard before on this channel. Not because the bark is less effective, because the bark has no patent holder funding research trials. Studies cost money. Money comes from companies that expect a return. A tree that grows wild on a riverbank cannot generate a return for anyone. So the funding flows to patentable molecules. The research follows the funding. The knowledge gap widens year after year after year. The science is settled, the history is documented, so the only question left is the one that actually matters to you. Can you find this tree yourself? Yes, and it is probably closer than you think. White willow, Salix alba, grows natively across Europe and Central Asia. It was introduced to North America centuries ago and has naturalized extensively. Related species carrying the same active compounds grow wild across nearly every state in the continental United States and every province in southern Canada. Salix nigra, the black willow, is the most common native species in North America. Salix purpurea, the purple willow, thrives in the Northeast. Salix fragilis, the crack willow, has spread along waterways from coast to coast. All of them produce salicin in their bark. All of them work. Willows love water. If you are standing near a river, a creek, a pond, a drainage ditch, or the edge of a wetland, look at the trees lining the bank. Look for long, narrow, lance-shaped leaves that taper to a fine point. Look for silvery green coloring on the upper surface and a paler, almost white underside. Look for slender branches that bend without snapping, flexible enough to weave into baskets. On mature trees, the bark is grayish-brown with deep vertical ridges running up the trunk. The tree leans toward the water. It always leans toward the water. If you see a tree matching that description along any waterway in a temperate climate, you are almost certainly looking at a willow. Harvest bark from younger branches, roughly 2 to 3 years old, not from the main trunk. Use a clean, sharp knife and peel strips of bark in spring or early summer when the sap is flowing and the bark separates easily from the wood underneath. Take small amounts from several branches rather than stripping any single branch bare. The tree heals, the bark grows back. Sustainable harvesting from one tree provides material for years. The simplest preparation is tea. Dry the bark strips for 1 to 2 weeks in a shaded spot with good airflow. Once fully dried, chop or crush the bark into small pieces. Steep 1 to 2 teaspoons in a cup of hot water for 10 to 15 minutes. The tea tastes bitter. That bitterness is the salicin. Add honey if you need to. Drink it for headaches, joint stiffness, muscle soreness, or mild fever. Grandmothers across a dozen cultures have been doing exactly this for longer than written history can confirm. One note worth mentioning: willow bark contains the same class of compounds as aspirin. If you are allergic to aspirin, avoid willow bark. Willow bark contains salicylates and must never be given to children or teenagers under age 19 with viral illnesses, such as flu or chickenpox, due to the risk of Reye syndrome, a rare but frequently fatal condition causing liver collapse and brain swelling. Furthermore, willow bark should strictly not be used during pregnancy, especially during the 3rd trimester, due to the risk of premature closure of the ductus arteriosus by individuals with active peptic ulcers or by patients taking anticoagulant and antiplatelet medications, such as warfarin or aspirin, due to increased hemorrhage risk. This is not a legal disclaimer meant to scare you away from a tree. This is the same common sense your great-grandmother would have shared at her kitchen table. 4,000 years of documented use. Every major civilization on Earth. One German pharmaceutical company in 1899. A patent, a pill, and a century of forgetting. The tree did not change. The bark did not lose its chemistry. The compound did not stop working. The only thing that changed was who profited from the solution. The willow does not care about profit margins. It grows where water flows. It drops branches in storms, and those branches root themselves in the mud where they land and become new trees. It survived ice ages and the fall of empires and the rise of the pharmaceutical industry. It is still there, lining every river and creek across the temperate world, producing salicin in its bark the same way it has for millions of years, waiting for someone to remember. The pill companies will not remind you. The supplement aisle will not carry what it cannot mark up. The medical establishment moved on a century ago and never looked back. But the tree is patient. It was here before aspirin. It will be here long after. And now you know where to find it.